institutions going from strength to strength, but whether our institutions will even survive. Not about the power of our collective citizen action, but about the division among the people. But I'll tell you, the silver lining, if there is one, is that we have been here before. We have been here before. On an early November 2004 morning, while my family and I were studying and working abroad in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, we saw this tabloid headline on our newsstand. The re-election of George W. Bush had happened. We were over 1 year into a war that would last 20 years. And over 59 million people back home reaffirmed the ostensible war on terror. For us, that was bleak. It was difficult. The moment was ominous. Out of that came some long nights, some hard questions, and some action steps. The next month, December 2004, we began the development of what became the website Citizen Life, citizenlife.org. A portal that we're still building to position you to gain citizen capital, overcome citizen action barriers, and transform your communities. We sought to meet the moment, silver lining. In about 3 years, 2026, the country will be how many years old? 250. This state, Maryland, is 235 years old this year in its statehood. And after a quarter of a millennium, we have seen many bleak, difficult, ominous moments, and many citizens across that history have met the moment. Today, in the short time we have together, I hope to leave you with a framework for developing the fullness of your citizen life so that you are ready to meet the moment when your moment arrives. I want to talk a little bit about what citizenship is, but let's begin with my take on what it isn't. Consumers are not citizens. You'll hear a lot of language in your life, in your outlets, in your distribution channels about the consumer price index and what consumers are doing and how the consumer is thinking. A consumer is not a citizen. A citizen, in the course of their citizen life, might conduct some consumption, right? But we shouldn't equate the two, right? The same way that economics is not life, citizenship is not consumption. Social media engagement is not citizenship, right? Influencers and followers can never really substitute for the face-to-face dialogues and the abiding dialogues that we have to have with each other in order to form our citizen lives. And importantly, citizenship is not civics. So if you come to an Active Citizenship conference thinking, well, I took civics, right? That's not necessarily what we're talking about. Civic life includes things like volunteerism and informal helping. It includes things like joining a civic organization, right? Learning in your education and your schooling, and reinforcing certain cultural norms, and celebrating civic success. An active citizenship life is a little different. That's about fundamental knowledge used for action, right? We're going to come back to that. That's why it's in bold. It's about broad, nonviolent citizen action methods. And at the end of this presentation, you're going to see a QR code. I'm going to ask you to pull out your phone, and you're going to be able to look at 198 of them, right, that you might want to consider. It's also about examining cultural norms for democratic effectiveness and for systemic vulnerability. We're going to talk a bit about that as well. And it's about celebrating improvements in justice and empowerment, right, and in transformation. We don't talk often enough about justice, right? And it's difficult to imagine an active citizen life without that being a cornerstone of the work. Let's explore fundamental knowledge as a differentiator in a more detailed way. But what is citizenship? What's my definition? Active citizenship at its best works to deliver democratically, and that's lowercase d. We're not talking about the non-constitutional political parties here, right? The hopes, dreams, inspirations, expectations, and aspirations of most of us most of the time, while in every instance, keeping track of the humanity of the most vulnerable. Right? When I say the most vulnerable, what do I mean? Let me give you an example. We pay for the powerful, incredible, useful, helpful institution of public schooling in the United States. But how do we pay for it? Taxes, right? Property tax, income tax, sales tax. Who's made vulnerable by that systemic choice? Right? That decision didn't descend from on high. We chose that methodology. Who's made vulnerable by that? Communities with low economic activity, with low tax base, right? The very communities we want to deeply, abidingly invest in, because those kids in those communities have fewer resources. But our model does the opposite, right? Active citizenship is in every instance looking to do both the democratic, what most people most of the time want, while in every circumstance saying to ourselves, wait a minute, who did we just make or keep vulnerable to harm by that decision? And how do we account for that? Why is that important? Because we all have a nickel in the vulnerability quarter. Right? We all have a nickel in that. There will be a moment, more than one, in all of our lives where we are the vulnerable party. And in that moment, we will have wanted to play our citizenship role in building a society that looks out for that works to remediate that. But how ready are we for this citizen work? Well, let's take the wallet test. Let's take the wallet test. Here it is. I'll make a deal with you. I'll give the first person in this audience to raise their hand. Make sure you listen to everything I say first. Everything I have in my wallet, don't get excited, it's not allowed. If you can name each of your elected officials, local to global, and what work they did for you on Friday. If you can't, I get everything in your wallet. Everybody's like, it ain't that much either. How many people would even consider taking that challenge today? How many people know where to go right now to quickly get authentic and actionable information that would answer those questions? I've asked that question for 14 years, and this has always been the answer. In multiple venues, in multiple settings, in massive groups, in small, intimate conversations, name your elected representatives local to global and what they did today, or yesterday, or the last day of work, and no one knows. What does it mean that none of us know? That connecting with and directing our representatives isn't a daily part of our lives? How do they represent us if they have no relationship with us? Importantly, if they aren't representing us, who in the heck are they representing? Because a few of us, a very small few, are calling them every day and putting them to work. Every day. And most of us don't even know who they are. So we come to the work that is the framework. We come to the work that is the framework. Oh, by the way, these are my representatives. Right. I didn't give you my full address. I don't need y'all rolling up. I live in Westminster, and my city representatives, my county representatives, those are in blue, I'm in a district within that group, right? So at the national level, I sit in Congressional District 2, the Dutch Ruppersberger. At the state level, I sit in District 5, right? But these are all the folks that I need to know. Let's examine the fullness of our lives across 3 dimensions. And I challenge you today to take hold of and wrestle with the possibility of a 3-dimensional citizen life for yourself. Just like many structures we build across our reality, those 3 dimensions are length, width, and height. And we'll use those axes to describe our framework for sustained citizen action. Now, this framework comes from a speech in April of 1967 from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, a speech called The 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life. And in that speech, he talked about this idea of the length of life being development of the self, right? An inward look at knowing what we don't know and developing our own citizen capital for action, right? He talked about the width of life, having done that work, being readiness for the outward concern for others. Right? And we'll talk about what citizen life and citizen partnership is in that integrated, interdependent context. And then the height of life. Having done all that, what is the upward reach of your work? How do you make it transcendent and transformative, right? And lasting. Why MLK? Well, it was a time of crisis then. He gave this speech on April 9th, 5 days after the speech he gave at Riverside Church on Beyond Vietnam that changed his relationship with the government and with advocates. A lot of people turned against him at that time. Right? Personally, for him, he was receiving death threats every day. He had been in jail 18 times. He had had his house bombed 3 times. And we all know he died at the age of 39. Right? But this was 5 days after the major speech that shifted national sentiment against King. Right? Where he came out against the war of Vietnam. Right? Time of crisis. Time of crisis. Then it's the same for us now. Right? Whether we're talking about global pandemic, where we're talking about our ability to discern truth, capital T and lowercase t, from propaganda. Right? Whether we're talking about economic and ecological crisis, generational racial reckoning, because it seems like we go through it every generation. Or we're talking about people trying to tell us, oh, it's business as usual. There's been no return to normal. We might be going forward to a new normal, right? And who will shape that new normal? And this framework helps us in the spirit of the Constitution and the Declaration to become more perfect, more complete, right? We're never done that work. It's the same way the union or the nation has never done that work. But as we seek a more perfect union, that begins with us as citizens, right? Becoming more complete. This framework captures the imagination and allows the possibility of doing just that. So again, yes, becoming more complete on all sides, length, width, and height. Let's talk length. There's a book I have in my house by a rabbi named Joshua Loth Liebman, a book called Peace of Mind, and my copy is deteriorating, so I might need to get it on Kindle. But in that book, he has a chapter called Love Yourself Properly. And his argument is that before you can support others adequately, you've got to develop your own self properly, right? It's really hard to sustain the work of engagement with others if you haven't done the work for yourself. I can relate to this in my own life. I can imagine that others might as well, right? I'm at my best for others, whether it's family or community or the world, when I care for my own self properly. Agree? To deliver for our own citizen selves begins, I would submit, by turning inward with a focus on strategies and tools. Let's spend a little time on the importance of first steps. And my argument here is that you got to grow an appetite for new beginnings in this work, right? My dad, I will quote my dad throughout this thing, but my dad says, a lot of people say that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and he would argue that a lot of people are wrong. A journey begins with facing in the right direction. Right? Otherwise, your journey might be longer than it needs to be. Right? So orienting ourselves to the types of tools that are available to us and being ready to begin again and again with these different tools is part of self-development as a citizen and a citizen life. Another piece that I want you to consider is that, and I've talked about this before, I'm going to talk about it again, is that one of the tool sets that I think is very important is a tool set by a gentleman named Gene Sharp out of the Albert Einstein Institute. Rest in peace, Gene. But he created a tool called the 198 Methods of Nonviolent Action, right? Because sometimes we feel as if we're frustrated and we don't know what to do. So again, later on today, you're going to get a QR code to scan that, and you're going to be blown away by all the things you may not have thought of that you can take action on right now to develop yourself. One of the first things in that list is make a public statement, right? Stand up and declare who you are. In this age of information, we have more data, more information, more noise than ever before, but sometimes we have less clarity on who people are, what they're standing for, what are their values. So consider making a public declaration, right? The second one is forge representation relationship with your representatives. Forge a representation relationship with your representatives. My youngest son Kai is in the room. Raise your hand. He is 12 over here, this guy. And he has left messages for his representatives, right, about various issues. Don't be afraid to put your representatives to work. Like, well, Mel, when I'm in Carroll County, my representatives may not reflect my view on things. They hold an office that is abiding, right? As soon as they enter that office, they work for you. Right? So put them to work. I'll give you a great example. The Real News Network, an alternative news network out of Baltimore, Maryland, did a story on prisoners in Jessup, our state prisons. And the story was that prisoners there were working to get their degrees so that they could come out and do what everybody says they want prisoners to do when they come out, right? Which is be effective contributors to their society. In order to get those degrees, they had to take tests. In order to take those tests, they had to let proctors into the prison. And at some point, the wardens just said, no more proctors. No more proctors meant no more tests. No more tests meant no more degrees. We were putting these folks at a disadvantage when we said that's what we want them to do. So I heard that story and I did what? I called my representatives. And I said, hey, I just heard this story. I need you to investigate whether this is true. And if it is true, I need you to help change it today. Now, most of my representatives that I called, we don't agree on almost anything ideologically. But where we did have common ground was that all of us wanted returning citizens coming out of that system to be fully empowered with all the tools and all the opportunities that they had so that there would be less recidivism, right? Less return to that system. Right? So we got movement on that and we changed that policy. We changed that choice. So it's important for you to forge a representation relationship with your representative. And you can do that today. It doesn't require any special tools, any special knowledge other than looking up your representatives, finding out who they are and giving them a call, leaving them a message. Right? It used to be the case that representatives would give more weight to a handwritten letter than they would a phone call, than they would an email, right? But right now, there's so few people engaging that it's just about engagement, right? It's just about engagement. The other one, and this is the language that King uses, know your tools and limitations, right? Know where your strengths lie and know where you need development. We need you to deploy your strengths, right, in this work, right? But you also want to know where you want to get better, right? You also want to know, and then the power of decisions. You know, lots of times folks want to wait for the singular, decisive moment to act, right? They go, if I can just maximize this opportunity and pull the biggest possible lever, I can move the whole world. Well, that's one way. That's a lot of waiting, right? Today, you can make small decisions in your locale that make a difference as well. In fact, all of this is experienced locally, right? There's an old saying that says politics is local. Well, actually, everything's local, right? We experience it right where we are, right? So there's opportunities you can take and make decisions on small local issues right now that can transform lives. And when I say local as McDaniel College, right? You have the opportunity to transform lives and situations in the world right where you are. The length of life. Let's talk width. So we're doing the work of self-development, but we can't stop there. Active citizenship isn't, to my mind, a navel-gazing, self-aggrandizing exercise, right? I want to talk to you a little bit about the story of the Dalai Lama. Who discovers the Dalai Lama? Does anybody know? It's another Lama named the Panchen Lama, right? So the Panchen Lama's job in life, his role, is to find the next Dalai Lama, the next Buddha of compassion, right? And what does the Dalai Lama do? The Dalai Lama finds the Panchen Lama, right? They find each other. And in Tibetan Buddhist mythology, this has happened forever and will happen forever, right? They need each other, right? To find each other, to become what they are supposed to be. And this work of the width of life is about this idea that we need to go from inhabiting similar space next to each other, to talking to each other, to recognizing I need you. powerful transformation. How are we going to do that work? Well, we've got to break down some mythologies in order to be able to do that work, particularly in the United States. We got some secular gospels in the United States that subvert the truth that I need you. I need you. What are those mythologies? One is rugged individualism, right? That's a big mythology in the United States. I like to call upon one of my favorite authors and speakers, an anti-racist worker named Tim Wise, where he says, rugged individuals don't exist, and if you see one, you need to run. You need to run from that thing. It will not know language. It will not know the taboo of not eating you, right? It will have no relationship with other humans, right? Rugged individuals don't exist. We are all raised in a social context. We've all had help, right? This is in the same vein, you'll hear people say, well, that's a self-made woman or a self-made man. That person doesn't exist, and it's important to come in a relationship with folks to sort of subvert these narratives. Because when you dialogue with somebody who describes themselves as self-made, you find out all the points at which they got help, right? First of all, they didn't birth themselves, right? Somebody brought them into the world, somebody cared for them, right? But even when it comes to the opportunities and the things that they've done, they are at the same time all of their own skill and will, while also existing in a dependent context, right? And sometimes in the United States in particular, it's hard for us to hold more than one idea about this in our mind at the same time. And we've got to be able to do that because that's the truth of the narrative, right? It's both things, right? It's also this idea of systems and institutional action. In the United States, because of this individuated myth, we tend to monsterize in situations. We tend to talk about, well, if we could just find the monster, the evil doer in the moment, we can solve for that. If we can get the guy with the twirly mustache to take the damsel in distress off the train tracks, we can win, right? When the truth is, very often, because of the systems that we built, right, because of the institutions that we have, we can have injustice manifest, right? And we can have inequity manifest when there's no evildoer in the room. A great example is how we get jobs in the United States. 58% of all jobs are gotten through what? Personal network, right? The old girls club, the old boys club, right? But if the way to get the job is through Bob, right? And Bob knows who he knows, and everybody that Bob knows is like Bob, and I'm not like Bob, well, I don't even have access to that opportunity. But Bob didn't have to be racist for that to happen, right? Bob didn't have to be sexist for that to happen. Bob was just Bob. The system of how jobs are acquired was the culprit in this moment, right? And so we've got to understand systems and not just individuals. When we understand systems, we get less about the monsterizing of people in our citizen lives and more about the shifting of the system. Those are the big levers at play. And then in this citizen work, you're going to hear a lot of, well, that's the way it is, right? That's the way it's been. That's the way it's going to be. That's the way it is. Feel comfortable reflecting that the whole history of this country is churn and change, right? Every generation has seen churn and change. Women don't vote. That's just the way it is. They just don't vote. Black people don't go to college, that's just the way it is. Right? Gay people are not allowed to express themselves. That's just the way it is. Right? When we get engaged on these issues at a citizen level, we change that from that's the way it is to that's the way it was. Right? And we've got to subvert these mythologies together in order to move this work forward. Strategies and tools. I'm going to go quickly through these. It's important to understand citizen capital, to understand the garnering of resources that pull down barriers. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about the axes of citizen community, what it means to be Paul Revere versus William Dawes, and anti-fragility. Low citizen capital. At the top is our citizen goal, and we're at the bottom. And when we have low citizen capital, we may fall at the first barrier to doing that work, right? But when we have high citizen capital, like some of us, not many of us, but some of us, we go right around those barriers. We helicopter right in, and we hit our goal each and every time. Well, what are the barriers very often? Access. We just talked about that. We don't even know who our representatives are, right? We don't have a meaningful relationship with them. We have to fix that. Language, and this isn't really language like English versus something else. This is the political language of legislation, right? It's the political language of bills, right? You pick up a bill, and it'll be an omnibus bill that'll go whereas, the previous whereas, and its first 15 pages are whereas, right? And you've got to know the other 15 bills to be able to read this bill, right? It's just like your doctor, right? When he goes, you're metatarsus and you're flactoid or whatever it is, and you're like, what? Right? It's language that excludes, right? Lawyers have language that excludes. It's for that in group. It's in-group language. And we've got to be able to subvert that. Time. We all perceive ourselves as not having enough time, right? We have time for the things we want to make time for, right? And we've got to make this very easy and straightforward. And then our network, right? We have to build networks, access networks that allow us to maximize our citizen capital. I want to talk a little bit about, almost every two-axis chart, you want to be high and to the right on two positive axes. You want to be high and to the right, right? We've all learned this in statistics. If you've learned anything at all in statistics, I was slow. And when we think about, I've given you two axes here. One is storytelling and connected versus siloed and isolated. One is fragile versus anti-fragile, which we'll go into a little bit more. We want to be high and to the right as citizens. We want to be telling stories that connect us with others. We want to be hearing stories that connect us with others. And we want to function anti-fragilely. Anti-fragilely. What do I mean by all that? Well, let's talk about storytelling. One of the best ways to connect with folks is to think about storytelling in three parts. Story of me, story of you, story of us. Story of me, story of you, story of us. It is important for people to know who you are. But it's also important for you to do active listening, to ask clarifying questions, to understand the story of others. And then the most important work is how do we bridge those?